Hello and welcome. My name is Lexi, and here I like to talk about luxury beauty and Fude brushes. And today we are talking about the new Sonia G Mini KEYAKI version 2 set. This is a limited edition travel brush set. It is exquisite, and I would like to begin by saying thank you so much to Sonia G and Beautylish for sending me these brushes. I was incredibly speechless when I found out, just shocked. I always buy the Sonia G brushes, so I would highly recommend Sonia G brushes as a brand. We're going to dive into these. We're going to look at some comparisons and some demos so you can really see how these perform and whether or not these brushes fit into your collection. So this is a travel set and it is sold as a set for 160 US dollars. It is available on the Beautylish website. That is the only place to purchase Sonia G brushes. And I also have the version 1 set right here to compare that with, along with some others. So let's go ahead and we're going to start by looking at these brushes individually. First, let's take a look at the Jumbo Base. So I'd like to mention this is the only brush in the series that is a repeat of something already out. This is the Sonia G Jumbo Base from the Fusion series, and you can see here that there is a length difference in the handles. You can see the different height. Your brush heads are going to be the same. If you're not familiar with this brush, the Fusion series, these brushes are sold individually. It's currently unavailable, it's out of stock, but it'll be back. The Fusion series is where Sonia G started kind of bringing out some synthetic fibers. So these brushes are all a mix of 2 different types of synthetic fibers and undyed goat hair. So it makes it very versatile, but yet it doesn't feel like your traditional synthetic brushes. Usually a synthetic brush, even the really good ones, they have a very, very smooth cuticle. They're not really as effective as picking up products, but you know, synthetic brushes are fantastic with cream products. And that was kind of the purpose of the Fusion brushes, is to have something that really excels with creams and liquids, and can also be used with powders. So these do feel a little bit more natural than a fully synthetic brush. They're incredibly soft. They excel at picking up the product, and I personally love them for creams and liquids. And the Jumbo Base here, you can see you have this angle here. It's kind of a gradual curve that goes up, and then we have more of this flatter back here. This brush, in my opinion, is fantastic for foundation. That's my primary use for it. I actually have 2 of the ones from the Fusion series because I use it so frequently for foundation. This works really well with those thinner foundations that, you know, are very liquidy. They're running kind of fast. You want to spread that out quickly. That'll do that. This will give it a nice, you know, kind of a smooth finish, but it's a more dense brush, which you can see here. So it's not going to give you super thick coverage with a thin foundation. However, this density also makes it ideal for working with some thicker foundations, some of those like cream to powder foundations and things like that, that have that thicker consistency that you want to blend out, but you kind of want a softer, slower blend on those. And this works great for that as well. So I feel like it's a very multifunctional foundation brush. Now, I personally, when I use cream, blush, bronzer, contour, I love to use whatever foundation brush I just used, especially on my fair skin. It kind of dilutes the color a little bit. And even if I'm working with a light color, I usually, if I use a different brush for blush, bronzer, and contour, I usually then stamp over the edges with my foundation brush. This Jumbo Base is a go-to for that. So I find that it works really well for cream blush products, bronzer, contour as well. Because of this shape here, this edge of the brush, the steepest edge here, that if you use that side, that angle, you can really get in a little bit more precisely with contour products, and it works really well for that. And then you can obviously turn it, blend it out, and so forth. So the Jumbo Base is a fantastic brush in my opinion. I absolutely love this brush. Now, as for comparisons, again, we have the travel size versus the full size from the Fusion series. They are the same except for the handle. My 2 closest brushes, these are both undyed goat hair. So they are used with creams, liquids, and powders. And these are fantastic brushes. I love these as well, but these are going to have a little bit more of your traditional shape. This is the Chikuhodo T11. I love this. I use this for thinner foundations. You can see here that the brush head is going to be a little bit more narrow here. The height is about the same, but what's missing is this is going to be symmetrical on both sides. So you have a little bit of a curvature up, and there's a tiny bit of a flat portion here at the top. Whereas this, you've got this angle here and then more of the straight drop down. It's also, you know, just, it's meant to go in this movement. You know, these are intended to bend back. So it's going to perform slightly differently. I find that this one, the Jumbo Base, works really well with foundations of all types, whereas the T11, I really prefer for those thinner consistencies. And a lot of that has to do with this shape being more narrow here. And you can see the flex. This is going to be more stiff, but it's straight, whereas this has more give. This other brush, this is the Rephr 05, and you can see here, this is actually a blush brush, but you can see it has kind of a similar shape. It's almost like a larger version all around from the T11, but because it does have the longer bristles, it's going to flare out a bit more, making it a little bit fluffier. I typically use this for blush, but I just wanted to give it to you as a comparison for the size. And last up, this is the Rephr 24, which you can see is similar to the 05, but it's going to be a little bit shorter. It's more dense, it's wider overall. But again, this is going to be symmetrical on both sides like the T11. It's essentially a larger version of that compared to the Jumbo Base. So I use the 24. It works well for foundation, but actually I prefer this one for bronzer. So, you know, it's really a personal preference, but yeah, I like this one for bronzer. I prefer this for foundations. We're going to move on to the Jumbo Worker brush here. And this brush is the same fiber composition as the Jumbo Base. And the detail brush that we're going to get to also has the same composition of synthetic fibers mixed with the undyed goat hair. So it's suitable for liquids, creams, and powders. And the first brush this made me think of was actually the Jumbo Concealer. And as you can see in the demos, this brush I find works really well for concealer. You know, if you are somebody who likes a large fluffy brush for concealer, this is really great for that. It works really well for that. If you're doing spot concealing, this is a little bit too large for that. But I like it for under the eye concealing. It's also small enough that you can use it for like a one and done shade or a base shade on the eyes. It works really well for that with liquids, creams, and powders. In the demo here, I did use a liquid shadow, a cream shadow. It's the RMS Eye Light. I wanted to show you how it performed with that, but again, this works beautifully just with powders as well, and it has enough flex and give in the bristles that you can give it a little bit of a blend in the crease as well. So I think the brush really performs well that way. This is also a great size for like a cream highlighter or a powder highlighter. But if you're looking for something smaller that, you know, kind of doesn't get too large of an area, it works well for that. It also works well to dab on cream blushes. So in the demo here, I dabbed on the color with this brush, but I did use the Jumbo Base for blending it out, which you saw in the previous demo. But if you want, you can totally blend it out with this. I find that if I'm using something that is a very deep color, it's great to dab it on with this and blend it out with a little bit of a larger brush. But this brush is definitely great for a cream, blush, bronzer, highlight as well. So let's take a look at a few comparisons. So just real quickly, this one here is the Jumbo Worker, and you can see that we have a symmetrical brush on both sides. There's a little bit of a taller ridge here at the top, which allows it to kind of get into that crease area. So when you go like this, you can definitely kind of get into there, and it's going to give you a nice soft blend. Do you need to use this? No, because we have a grease brush in this set as well. But if you are looking to reduce the number of brushes you have to clean, which I always like to do, this is definitely one that is great for that. So, you know, as a one and done shadow brush, I think this is fantastic. If you're looking for something more detailed, it's too large for that. But Those would be my favorite purposes for it. And this here is the Jumbo Concealer from the Fusion series. So we have the same brush composition. You can see that the Jumbo Concealer is going to be smaller overall. You can see that it's shorter, it's more narrow, just slightly. And you know, the shape, this is going to be a little bit more straight. It doesn't have as much curvature on the sides, whereas this has a little bit more of a slope. So because this is a little bit bigger, you're going to have a little bit of an airier feel, whereas this will be a little bit stiffer. They are both fantastic brushes, but if you are looking for brushes to travel with, I feel like this is a true multitasker. Let's look at some more comparisons. All right, so Jumbo Worker, and this is the Chikuhodo. This is the KZ6. It's one of my favorite eye brushes. It is my favorite one and done eyeshadow brush of all. You can see that the Jumbo Worker is gonna be a little bit smaller. This is Kazan Squirrel Hair, so it's very soft. You cannot use this with liquids and creams. This is powder only. And you can see the amount of give and flexibility you have with this compared to this one. There's more snap in the Sonia G, and you can see that not only is there more snap, but because this is a little bit wider, you also have just a little bit more flexibility in general. It's just that the bounce back is going to be pretty stiff. So I think overall they're both great brushes, but just a size comparison here. Another comparison, this is the Jumbo Blender from Sonia G, and you can see that this one is smaller. This is dyed goat hair, so this is powder only, but you can see here that your general shape of it is pretty similar, except this is going to be a bit more square, whereas the sides here around it on the Jumbo Blender, and they go straight up on the Jumbo Worker. So you can see the difference there, and obviously the size difference. And this is the Worker brush from the Lotus series, and you can see that the shape of these is the same. The big difference is going to be your size and your fiber composition. This is undyed goat hair, which makes it usable for liquids, creams, and powders just like this. But look at the size difference. Obviously, this is a lot smaller than the Jumbo Worker, but because of that, you can see this is going to be a little bit more airy. You've got a little bit more flex. It's going to cover more area, whereas this is going to have a bit of a stiffer spring back. Now, one thing to know, although these brush shapes look identical like this, if you look very closely, we've got fibers just starting to get increase in length right around here. It's very, very gradual. And we have the same deal here, but it actually starts a little bit lower. So it's going to be a little bit of a stiffer increase there, if that makes sense. And the last brush I want to compare, this is the Isom V29, which is a synthetic brush. You can see it does have a similar shape as well. But again, the Jumbo Worker is bigger. This is completely synthetic. This is my favorite synthetic series. The Byredo are in there too, but I feel like those are kind of separate because they have very specific shapes. But look at the flex on this and how much it springs back compared to the Sonia G, which is going to be just a little bit softer, a little bit more gentle, less spring in there because again, we do have those mix of different fibers. So just something to note there. General shape is going to be pretty similar, but the size is the biggest difference here, as well as the flexibility of the fibers. So to me, what the flexibility of the fibers does is it makes the Jumbo Worker a little bit easier to use for powder products as well as your creams and liquids. Whereas this one here, since it's a little bit stiffer, I prefer to use this more for painting on any sort of liquids and creams. I'll use this either for eyeshadow. This one also works great for concealers, but I don't find it to be as effective with powders because again, there's so much spring here, you're not gonna really get as smooth of a blend or as soft of a blend. So those are the big differences here in functionality. Next, this is the soft face from Sonia G. This is all undyed goat hair. This is the powder brush. And just a quick look, we're gonna take a closer look at version 1 of the KEYAKI set before, but this is the classic face, the powder brush from the first KEYAKI set. This is a mix of dyed and undyed goat hair versus 100% goat hair here. So just so you can see the size difference, this is a little bit smaller And notice we have a rounded ferrule here, which gives it a little bit of a different shape. This is going to be more of your oval ferrule here. So slight differences, we'll talk about those again in a few minutes, but let's talk a little bit about this. So as you're looking at the demo, the primary purpose for this brush is to be used with powders. Technically, it's undyed goat hair, so yes, it is, the fibers themselves are safe to use with liquids, creams, and powders. But because of the structure of this brush and how loose and airy it is, it's probably not ideal for creams and liquids because it's so airy and in a way delicate that it's going to end up not really being able to move the creams and liquids, which are heavier products, around that much. So it's not going to be ideal for those products. If you use it with creams and liquids, it's not going to hurt the brush though. So ideally this will be for powders. And this is your powder brush. It works great under the eye powder. It fits very nicely under the eye or for like smaller areas around the nose and so forth. But again, if you're traveling, you don't want to carry a lot of brushes. This works for all over the face powder as well, for setting and finishing powder. And the fact that it's undyed goat hair and is safe to be used in conjunction with creams and liquids makes it really great to use for a setting powder as well. Because if your face is still damp from previous makeup application, you know, it won't be damaged in any way from that. So it works well for powders, but this is also a great size for blush, bronzer, and even contour, unless you're trying to be super specific with your contour, because it is a little airy. So, you know, just something to note there. But I think, you know, this works great for blush and bronzer. You could even use this for highlight as well. So it's kind of your all-around face brush. And I think it's really great. So it's a small enough size to be used for detail work, large enough size that you can use it all over the face without being annoyed by, you know, taking longer. But if you were at home and you had access to bigger brushes, that's what I would use for, you know, all over face application for setting or finishing powder. However, if you're traveling, this definitely works for that. And if you were at home, this is still fantastic for a blush brush, in my opinion. And just something to note with shorter handles, you know, even if you're not traveling, these travel sets are great for anybody who needs to get a little bit closer to the mirror, maybe perhaps poor vision. I used to have very bad eyesight, like seriously, negative 9.75 diopters. That's how bad I was. So I have had LASIK twice. But prior to that, I'd have to get really close to the mirror, and makeup brushes just always got in the way because the handles were too long. So the travel size brushes are ideal if you're in a situation like that as well. Let's take a look at a few comparisons. So we've got the soft face here. This is the Refer 18. This is a blush brush. You can see this has a round ferrule, but our shape is very different. This essentially, you've got the round ferrule with all the same size bristles that are essentially gonna kind of tulip out. Whereas this, you've got, your bristles are a little bit longer, but you can see that they're gonna taper. So you end up having more of this oval shape here. And because this kind of pinches them a little bit tighter here, these are gonna flay out or splay out instead, whereas these are able to stay more firmly compact just because of the way everything is shaped and gathered. So you can see how this performs. This is great for this kind of circular motion. It's a little bit more dense. You can notice the flex in here, whereas this is gonna be softer and airier. So also great for this motion, but this is gonna give you a softer finish on the face, and you're going to get just a little bit of a lighter application than you would with something more compact. And another comparison here, this is the Sonia G Soft Cheek. This is also around ferrule here, but notice the difference. Here we have our fibers starting to increase in length from right here. They get a little bit longer. So we're gonna get this curve, and then we have this flat top here. So I love this brush. I think it's one of the best cheek brushes in Sonia G's line, in my opinion. Look at this, you can see it's also gonna be larger overall. But this shape is going to give it a difference, whereas these are all essentially the same size. They are a little bit longer here in the center, but because of this, you know, your action's gonna be a little bit different. And just notice how these kind of stick together more. This is dyed goat hair, which makes it a little bit softer versus the undyed goat hair. So the softness of these bristles also kind of helps, you know, because they're a little bit softer and because they're just a little bit more delicate due to the dye that's added to these brushes, this will help keep your fibers a little bit more tightly packed. It's kind of like if you take your own hair and you wash it and you dry it without conditioner, you can kind of get a little bit more like frizz and so forth, whereas the conditioner itself kind of smooths it down. That's kind of what the dyeing process does to hair. People who have dyed your hair, you may have noticed that after you get your hair dyed, it feels a little bit softer. It might look a little bit better, not just for the color, but the texture. And that's going to make it perform just slightly differently as well. And I just wanted to compare one last brush here to the soft face. The soft face here, this is the Classic Cheek. Again, this is our handle size difference. The Classic Cheek is one of my favorites, but notice this is almost more of your ball shape. It's going to be a little bit more tightly packed again than this. This is gonna kind of be, it's more evenly dispersed, it splays out, whereas here we have a little bit of a tighter core. So you've got more of this like buffing motion here, whereas this will splay out and give you a little bit more of like a fan type motion. So just something to note for me, I think this splaying out makes it a little bit easier to use for setting and finishing powders, getting that really soft finish, getting a really soft application of blush. Whereas the Classic Cheek is one of my favorites for creams and liquid blush products or to kind of buff in a color. But if I'm looking for a very soft featherweight application, an area brush like this performs better. Next up, we have the crease brush. And you can see this is gonna be your tapered crease brush. It's gonna be a little bit stiffer. You've got these longer fibers here. It's gonna be more tightly gathered here. So you do have a round ferrule and you can see it's a little bit stiffer. It's not gonna splay out a lot. This is dyed goat hair, so this will be powder only. This is the only brush that technically has to be powder only. So none of the Sonia G crease brushes are exactly the same as this. This is gonna be a little bit different. My closest brush is actually this. This is the Hakuhodo B142. And you can see that the Sonia G crease brush here is just ever so slightly longer with the brush hairs. Handle length, you can see is different. But the brush hairs are a little bit longer in the Sonia G. Your general shape is pretty similar, but our diameter of the brush is a little bit smaller in the Sonia G. So compare this, how this swirls versus this. So this being a little bit bigger overall and being undyed goat hair, it's going to splay out just a little bit more, but they still kind of have that same compact, tighter feeling. So this actually is great for like more hooded eyes and things as well, if you really want to kind of get into that crevice. And if you don't have that issue, you can use the side of this to really get a nice blend as well. This compact size works great for outer corner. You can even use it on the inner corner. And that's pretty much what I would use this for. So I wouldn't really use this anywhere on my face. If you really were in a pinch, you could use it for some powder highlight, but it's gonna take a little bit of blending. Yeah, but this is essentially gonna be a great crease eyeshadow brush. So again, this is my closest, the Hakuhodo B142, and this is the Sonia G Classic Crease. You can see that this is gonna be bigger. It's got more of a flat top here. Again, round ferrule, but look at this motion in comparison. And again, this tapered top makes it a little bit more versatile. So as you can see in the demos here, we are using this in the crease, and I find it works really well for that. It works really well for any small targeted areas also. Obviously not extreme precision because it is a larger brush, but it works really well. I think it's actually probably going to be one of my favorite Sonia G crease brushes because it just fits so well in that socket. So I'm going to hold up, this is the Sonia G detail brush, and we're going to move on to this one now. This is a composition of synthetic and undyed goat hair, just like the Jumbo Base and Jumbo Worker, but I want to show you this compared to your crease brush. So look at the size difference. We have a couple brushes I wanted to compare kind of to both of them. This is the Sonia G Mini Booster. So you can see it's almost like a smaller size of the crease brush. It's missing the taper. This is a little bit flatter on the top, but the movement here is going to be much more similar. This detail brush is going to be very pointed. It's a little bit longer, but notice the stiffness of this. So this makes it really great for inner corner. You can definitely use this outer corner as well. This works for using it with like cream eyeshadows and so forth. If you want to work in like targeted areas, works for lower lash line, upper lash line, which you can see in the demos. I'll show you those in a second. But you can also use this for concealer. I personally like the other one for under the eye, but spot concealing, I think this is the perfect size. So again, this is the Mini Booster. And then just a couple more comparisons before we move on to those demos here. This is the Sonia G Pencil Pro. And you can see here that this is going to be shorter than the detail brush, not quite as tapered. This is undyed goat hair. This is going to be a little bit stiffer, but notice at the top here, since it's not as tapered, you don't have as much precision to the point. So I actually find this detail brush to be a little bit easier to use. And then this is the Crease one from Sonia G. You can see that the shape of this is very, very similar, but the Crease one is going to be larger. You've got more flex and give in the fibers, being undyed goat hair. And overall, I mean, look, this taper here, we're going to start tapering here, whereas here we're going up a little bit higher. So this is just going to be a little bit more precise. This is the Inglot 80HPS, which is going to be more rounded at the top. But this is also a great brush for spot concealing. However, because it's missing that taper, it doesn't perform as well for the, in my opinion, it doesn't perform as well for any detail work around the eye. And the last brush I want to compare with the detail brush is the T8 from Chikuhodo. This is undyed goat hair. You can see the shape is very, very similar here, but notice the T8 is ever so slightly larger, and it's a little bit slightly taller, slightly bigger diameter, and overall it's going to be a little bit more soft and flexible, whereas this is going to stay a little bit stiffer, making it a little bit easier to do detail work. Now this is undyed goat hair. Again, both of these brushes will be suitable for liquids, creams, and powders. So as you're looking at the demos for this detail brush, you can see here that I used this one primarily for the eyes, but again, this is a really great brush for spot concealing. I think that's definitely a great, purpose for it. And I don't know about you guys, but when I travel and I end up using different water and so forth on my skin, I usually do end up having breakouts and so forth. So using this detail brush with, I like to use a yellow powder or something before I put on foundation on those areas. So dabbing that on, put some on top of it, whatever. But I find that this is the best size for that and a great shape. So aside from that, you can see that this brush also works well for eyeliner. It's not going to give you the thinnest, most precise line because again, it is a little bit of a larger brush than a typical liner brush, but it's stiff enough that you can even use this to line your upper lash line if you want kind of that softer liner look. So overall, a fantastic brush. So now that we've talked about each of the brushes in version 2, let's also take a look at the version 1 KEYAKI set. So this is a set that came out previously. It's limited edition as well. I don't know if it will be returning again, but these are the brushes here. So we started off with the classic face, which is going to be your mix of dyed and undyed goat hair. This is powder only. And then we have the mini base, which is that same series of fibers that you find in the Fusion or the Jumbo Base and so forth. So the mini base here was kind of the intro to the Fusion series. So it's a blend of synthetics and undyed goat hair. I love this one. This is fantastic, in particular for cream cheek products for me. And then we have the Jumbo Blender. We looked at the tall version of this brush when we were looking at the Jumbo Worker. Then we have the Mini Booster and the Flat Definer. So these three brushes are undyed goat hair, again, suitable for liquids, creams, and powders. All four of these brushes can be used with anything. The classic face, however, is powder only. So kind of similar in that sense to version 2. Now, version 2 is meant to be a complement to version 1. So if you already have version 1, these brushes should fill in some gaps that you might have with this. But if you missed out on version 1, version 2 is completely functional on its own. So let's take a look at these side by side. Now in version 1, there isn't really a great foundation brush. For me, what I would use with version 1 is the mini base. Now, personally, this shape and size I think is better for blending out cream cheek products. Personally, for me, I like it for blush and highlight. You can use this for contour or bronzer as well. I feel like I don't use it for bronzer that much, but blush and even contour. But previously when I would pack a traveling bag, which honestly has not happened much since those came out, I would usually pack a larger foundation brush separately. This is a Kyoto F04, formerly the Fupa 03. And I would bring that instead, in addition to this travel set. But if you're working a pinch, this would be the foundation brush. So I feel like the Jumbo base here in version 2 has really kind of filled that gap there. And I find it's really suitable for cream, blush, and bronzer and contour as well because of this shape. This is one of my favorite brushes of all. Actually, if you follow the Fude Awards on Instagram, I actually posted, top 5 brushes I would first repurchase if I were starting over. This is one of them. So I find it an incredible brush. It definitely fills in the gap. However, I really like having the mini base for more specific cream cheek products as well. I find that this applies the brush just a little bit better, the blush a little bit better than the Jumbo Worker, but this will do as well. Now, between these, if we are going to continue moving on, the mini base here, this I would also use for under eye concealer. I feel like the Jumbo Worker does a better job of it. So with the two of these, I would prefer the Jumbo Worker for concealer, the mini base for cream blush. However, the Jumbo Worker can also be used on the eyes. The mini base is too large for that for me. So I feel like this is great for face specifically. Now, comparatively, if we're talking about the Jumbo Worker on the eyes, we have the Jumbo Blender, Undyed Go here. This works great for on the eyes as well. It's a little bit smaller. So it depends, whether you want something larger or smaller, but they both work well for one and dones. This is small enough though that you can be a little bit more precise and it doesn't have to be a one and done. Whereas this, I would specifically use it for a one and done shade or a base. Taking a look at the powder brushes here, we briefly looked at these before. Again, these are powder only. We've got Undyed Go Hair versus the mix of dyed and undyed. So the classic face here is going to be slightly softer because of those addition of dyed hairs. We mentioned that this is going to be a little bit larger and it has an oval ferrule versus the round ferrule, which gives you a slightly different shape. Now, I think both of these are very great at applying powder and so forth. This can be used for blush and everything as well, but I like the smaller size of this personally for blush, and I think it also works really well for highlight. This is something I can use for highlight as well, but I do find that this smaller brush is just a little bit more effective for me for highlight, but I feel like these two are pretty evenly tied here, and that they're obviously different, but they are close enough functionally that, these two, technically you don't need both of these. But again, if you missed out on one set, it's kind of a necessary brush in order to have in one of the sets. So moving on to the other eye brushes here. We took a look at the Crease and we looked at the full-size mini booster from the Sky series. This is the undyed mini booster. and you can see the difference here. Again, this new crease brush I find just to be better like overall, because you can use this in the crease. You can also use this kind of in the outer corner, inner corner, whereas the mini booster, I find you can use this like deep in the crease, but if you are using it as your only crease brush, I find this a little bit harder to use in that way because it's just not quite large enough. This, I really like focusing on the outer corner or even the inner corner with this. But again, for crease work, I find this to be a little bit more functional. Between the two of these, I would give the award to the crease brush over the mini booster. And last up, we have the detail brush and the flat definer. And I think these both work great for eyeliner, but they're both going to give you a slightly different effect. The flat definer here, you are able to get a thinner, more precise line. You can use this. I personally, I like to usually just use wet eyeshadow when I'm traveling for eyeliner. I typically don't bring a separate eyeliner. This works great to give you something precise, yet its bristles are soft enough that you can kind of smudge it out if you want a softer look as well. You can use this in the inner corner, and you can, if you were really in a pinch, you can use this all over your eye as well for like wet or metallic shadows and things like that also. So it's gonna be a very versatile brush. This is gonna definitely be better for always a softer eyeliner look versus something a little bit more precise here. I find this to be a little bit more comfortable going on the inner corner, and I really like smudging things out on the lower lash line with this. But these both meet the eyelining function just slightly differently. I think they're both great brushes, and I wouldn't hesitate to have both of these. So between the two sets, I have to say I really love both sets. There are definite favorites in each set, but if I had to choose between version 1 and version 2, I would honestly go with version 2 first, because version 2, not only do you have more unique brush shapes in here, again, the jumbo base is the only repeating shape, whereas in version 1, we had most of those brushes were repeating shapes, just different brush hairs. So for example, the mini booster, we went from the dyed go hair to the undyed, but the shape was the same. So I like having the more uniqueness of the brush shapes in version 2. Plus, for my particular application methods, I feel like that jumbo base is really key for me, and these brush shapes in general just speak to my particular favorite applications, particularly when I'm on vacation. I tend to reach more for cream products or powder products that are really simple, like one and dones and so forth, instead of something more detailed and intricate. So I feel like version 2 for me is just slightly better, but they're super close. So if you already have version 1 and you are looking for things to fill the gap, I think version 2 definitely fits that. If you missed out on version 1 and you're interested in version 2, I think version 2 is a great set to get. And between the two of them, they are, I personally prefer version 2 over version 1. As for the handle size, I personally love these travel handle sizes. KEYAKI, we got the KEYAKI name from the wood in the handles, which is stunning. You can see the grain in here, the color. We can't really smell it because there is like a seal on these, but they are fragrant trees in general. And I just love the aesthetic of this like darker wood with the grain, a little bit of redness in there with the matte black ferrule. So personally, I think these sets are both fantastic. So overall, I'd have to say if you're interested in a travel set, this is definitely a great set to pick up. It is limited edition. I'm not sure how long it'll be around or if it'll come back in the future, but I really like it. And again, if you are somebody who has vision trouble and you like shorter handle brushes so you can get closer to the mirror, I think this is a really great set for that as well. So I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions down below in the comment box. And thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you very soon.